South Africa's largest mobile operator, the Vodacom Group, has signed an agreement with Elon Musk's Starlink to deliver high-speed, low-latency broadband internet for businesses across Africa. Vodacom states that integrating Starlink's satellite backhaul into Vodacom's mobile network will accelerate network coverage expansion and also help reduce network performance in rural areas, enhance rather the network performance in rural areas. Now, Starlink was said to launch in South Africa as early as 2022. However, regulatory requirements led SpaceX to cancel its launch plans for South Africa. For more on this, we joined on the line by founder of WorldWideWorx, analyst and technology commentator Arthur Goldstuck. Good to have you with us, Arthur. Welcome to Africa in Business.
Thank you very much. Good to be chatting with you again.
Now, so we understand that through this deal, Vodacom will now be authorized to resell Starlink equipment as well as Starlink services to enterprise and small business customers on the African continent. So could you help us understand the nature of this deal? Will Vodacom be more of a reseller, or do they stand to gain more from this partnership?
Vodacom will be a reseller, but they will also be a service provider of sorts because of selling the equipment as well. So they have to ensure that the equipment works on the ground. But ultimately, the service itself is provided directly by Starlink because that is the nature of the service in general. But it's important to bear in mind that they have not announced a rollout in South Africa, only across Africa.
Right. So Southern Africa and South Africa, we know that there were impediments there as far as BEE requirements are concerned. Where are discussions around the 30% ownership equity as stipulated in the Electronic Communications Act?
Well, there's one big gap in the whole picture so far, and that is that Starlink has not actually applied formally for a license in South Africa. And South African law requires that appropriate license before operating. So the Electronic Communications Act says that any electronic communication network or service provider must get the appropriate license. That's just the first hurdle. Then there's the broad-based BEE issue, where foreign telecoms operators have to have at least 30% of equity in the license holder held by people from historically disadvantaged groups. Now, there is discussion at the moment that has not yet been approved or turned into law to allow for equity equivalence, so investment locally as opposed to providing equity locally. But that is also still in the air. So you have two levels of regulatory hurdle that still have to be crossed in South Africa specifically. So there is currently public consultation on a new licensing framework for satellite operators or foreign operators, and they are looking at the equity equivalence model. And chances are that will eventually be passed, but there's tremendous political resistance to that. And then once that is out of the way, you still have to have all the equipment approved by the regulator, ICASA. And they call that type approval, where core equipment has to be licensed for use in this country, aside from any other license that's required. So 3 hurdles, but that last one is probably the easiest because every cell phone that comes into South Africa gets type approval before it gets sold in the market. That shouldn't be a hard one for Starlink.
We've focused a lot on the things that are up in the air. Maybe let's look at what's concrete regarding this particular agreement and which countries this is going to be rolling out in.
So it's going to be rolling out in every country where Vodacom operates and where Starlink is licensed. So it's a country by country issue, and it's more than a dozen countries we're talking about, and each one will have a slightly different licensing regime. But the intention of it is the same for all of these countries. It's to connect the unconnected by integrating Starlink satellite backhaul into Vodacom's mobile network to expand coverage, generally speaking, especially in rural areas. And that will bring connectivity to hospitals, clinics, and communities that are excluded from broadband access. They're also going to be offering these services to enterprise and small business customers. And they want to develop localized value propositions that are suited to African market conditions and affordability. So the packaging of the services will be geared towards local needs, even if the actual service itself is still delivered via satellite. Then they also say that they're responding to demand from very specific sectors like mining, oil and gas, agriculture, tourism, retail, financial services, and that will include pay-as-you-use backup internet services. So they're seeing this as a backstop, not necessarily as a primary service, but rather one that people can fail over to when the existing service crashes or undersea cables go down and the like, because it's a fairly expensive service. So the ideal is to use it when you really, really have to use it. But if you can rely on cheaper services like broadband via undersea cables and 5G, then that would be the way to go. So what Vodacom is saying is that it adds a new layer to its portfolio. So it has 4G, it has 5G, fiber to the home, fiber to the office, microwave transmission, and now satellite coverage as well.
As far as the regulatory hurdles that this particular, deal is going to have to overcome, has Vodacom, are we aware whether or not Vodacom has started these type of negotiations, and if there has been any appetite from any of the countries to make these type of services available in their territory?
At this stage, as far as we know, it's still up to Starlink to apply for the licensing, but there's no question about the reality that Vodacom will be a conduit to applying for the licensing. And they have their relationships, they have their licenses, they have their understanding of the local markets as well in all of these countries. So it certainly could fast track the process. And there's no question that this would be good for Vodacom and good for Starlink.
And talking about the plus side for Vodacom, how might this deal change the competitive dynamics between Vodacom and its main rivals in satellite and terrestrial broadband services?
Well, let's put it this way. Vodacom had already previously announced that they would partner with Amazon and its Project Kuiper, which is the equivalent. They've now rebranded it, by the way. They're now going to bring out something called LEO, and that's the acronym also for the low Earth orbit satellite system. And that hasn't exactly changed the landscape, because there are existing services that are a lot cheaper. And these, again, as I mentioned, are backup services, and they have not yet made an impact on rural connectivity, where Starlink has the potential in the long term to make a big impact.
And this is another huge positive for Vodacom because they've really been wanting to service rural and hard to reach areas across Africa. And this certainly looks like a tool for them to eventually be able to do that.
There's no question about it. One of the biggest challenges of connectivity across the continent is a tremendous amount of inhospitable terrain and very expensive terrain in order to connect up via fiber grids, for example. So we have a massive fiber grid in South Africa run by OpenServe, which is a subsidiary of Telkom, and it spans 180,000 kilometers of fiber. And yet there are many parts of the country that it can't reach because it's simply too expensive to reach those regions. And satellite comes along as the ideal solution. So it becomes a complementary layer to the existing fiber offerings.
All right.
And in the longer term, it basically fills the gaps.
Arthur Goldstuck, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us this afternoon. That's Arthur Goldstuck. He's founder of WorldWideWorx, an analyst and technology commentator.